feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Conversation. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, are you ready to do some serious ghost busting, spoiler edition?
Yeah, baby. Yes, today we will be doing a spoiler cast for Ghostbusters Afterlife. So, Eric and I have reviewed the movie, which you guys can go check out over on our reviews channel, Untitled Movie Reviews. We did I think we did over an hour spoiler free discussion about our detailed thoughts about the movie. So, here we'll probably go over that again, but in again with the handcuffs off, talking about all the spoilerific details of the movie. We're not going to necessarily one for one retread what we said. So if you want our full thoughts on the movie, go over to that and listen to that review. But now that everyone's had a chance to see it, it is the weekend after it has premiered, made $44 million on the weekend, which is pretty solid. I think that was above expectations, or I think it might even be closer to 60 million worldwide right now. So performing fairly well. If you guys listen to our review, you know that I'm a huge fan of the movie. Eric, not so much, which is totally cool. I think we had a great conversation. Eric mentioned saying it was, I think, one of his favorite reviews that we've done, showcasing that you can be on very opposite sides of an opinion on a movie, but still have a really great conversation about something.
Well, just not belittle the other person's point of view, right? Like, I think that's a big thing when it comes to film criticism, is that even when it's done jokingly, there's this kind of sort of connotation where, you know, film critics, the person's point of view is considered to be superior even to another critic. It's like, well, you're actually wrong. Even when you're joking, it's still, there's this kind of like underseated truth to being like, well,
my opinion is better than
yours,
which really it's not. It's just all subjective. So
exactly,
you can have a conversation with someone who has the opposite feelings and still have respect the other opinion, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. So we're going to continue that.
I wanted to start somewhere a little bit off the beaten trail.
So spoilers, guys. We're going full spoilers.
Yes, full spoilers starting right now. I want to apologize to the people that we interrupted at the a press screening that we were put in the wrong
I do feel
room,
bad about that, yeah.
And it was for a cast only screening in Cinema 10 at the Scotiabank Theater.
Screen X.
We apologize again to...
I highly doubt that they're listening to this, but yes.
I know. I keep thinking about
it was a funny story. I felt bad too, because like
Yeah.
we went to go see Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, which you guys can check out our review of soon-ish. It'll be up when it's up. Might be our 300th episode. I gotta look at that and see if that's actually still accurate. That being said, yeah, we went in and they're like, oh, it's in theater 11, supposed to start at 10:15, and we're like, okay, cool. Go in, and then we're like, oh, this is relating to Ghostbusters, because we walk in and Ghostbusters is playing in Screen X. So if people don't know what Screen X is, it's like that gimmick of there's screens on the side walls as well as in front of you. So we go in there and we're just, it's before a press screening. Some people are talkative sometimes we're just sitting in silence. This time we were all talkative because we're like, oh, it's funny, Ghostbusters is playing. We all came in at the same time. We talked for a good 10 minutes throughout the whole opening scene of Ghostbusters. So spoilers, it's the whole, Egon running through the cornfields, like chasing Gozer and trying to trap Gozer. Zool, sorry, yeah. Zool at the beginning, and it's a great sequence. And we're just talking throughout it. I'm shit talking Screen X like there's no tomorrow. I'm like, this thing sucks. I'm like, Screen X is so dumb. Like, why? You're basically taking a 239 movie and stretching it so you're watching it in basically 185, but then the sides, which you would have seen on a normal screen, are just stretched beside you. I'm like, it's the dumbest thing ever, and I'm saying that over and over again very loudly. And then, like, basically as the title sequence comes on, we hear, hey guys, could you guys keep it down? Like, we're trying to watch the movie. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, this is a cast screening for Ghostbusters Afterlife. And we're like, oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I am I'm so sorry. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, we're going. And we were just confused because we were told to go in that theater. But
Yeah.
I feel real bad we ruined that whole opening sequence for those people. But I would have yelled at us much earlier,
Yeah,
to be
I'm
honest.
surprised that they had the patience, and I'm also glad that we didn't talk about the movie specifically in terms of
And
like,
like
I mean, I'm
spoilers
sure
and
they
stuff
maybe
like that.
knew some of the stuff if they were cast members, but maybe I don't know, maybe they didn't
Maybe they
read the
thought we were other
script.
people who worked there, and then they were just annoyed, like, oh, these are our other coworkers, and they're just don't give a shit. But like, um, I honestly did. It was so my eyes were adjusting, right? Because we came from the bright hallway into the dark theater, and the movie's playing, so I didn't even know there were people sitting down there.
Well, I saw one
Um,
person, but I just thought they were other critics. I just thought that they were people that got there maybe before us or were already just kind of waiting for the film to begin.
yeah,
Because there's a group of film critics in at least in the Toronto scene, and I'm sure it is with any other sort of region.
this is what
Um,
everyone comes to the Ghostbusters Afterlife spoiler cast
Right,
for.
but there's people that like
Yeah,
everybody for the most part, but then you
sure,
also get some freelancers where it's like, okay, like this person maybe comes to one out of 6 screenings every
sure.
once in a while. So I was thinking like, oh, it's just another film critic who's here early, you know.
Yeah, and we were just waiting for them to turn off Ghostbusters. But then I was also confused, being like, why are we in the Screen X theater? Like, are they showing us Resident Evil in Screen X? I'm like, I hope not. Anyways, that story's over. Um, let's get into it. Eric, I don't know where you want to start because we're full spoilers now. So like, we can talk about the ending. We can talk about the whole movie.
Well, I
I
want to
know you
talk
have
about
some.
character first, and
Yeah.
I think that you brought up. I mean, you already mentioned. So, Egon is the dirt farmer and father to Carrie Coon's Callie,
Hmm.
as we learn throughout the film. They inherit the dirt farm after Egon dies in the opening sequence, which you never see. The
Yeah.
stand-in for Egon was actually Bob Gunton, who's probably best known for playing the warden in Shawshank Redemption,
Okay.
which I
Cool.
thought was kind of interesting. But here's my thing: I understand why they wrote Egon this way and sort of had his character go in this direction, because you obviously can't have Harold Ramis be a part of it anymore. So you kind of you're limited with what you can do with that character in terms of what you see on screen and how he's portrayed. But there's something about the way in which his character is the guy to kind of go in the direction he does that doesn't feel faithful to who Egon was. Because out of the 3 main Ghostbusters, I'm not including Ernie Hudson just because of like when you're first introduced to
Yeah, it's the
um
three doctors, and then Ernie comes in later.
yeah, when you're introduced to Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis, and then you kind of see them disband at the beginning of Ghostbusters 2 and see kind of like what they're doing, after busting all the ghosts. You see that Harold Ramis's Egon has gone into sort of a private field within the science industry and is having adorable animals taken away from children and couples fighting as the temperatures raise. So he's kind of gone into the private sector, where the guy who's kind of still, and then Bill Murray, as Peter Venkman, has become this talk show host, kind of this cheesy kind of like sci-fi talk show host, but with Dan Aykroyd's Ray, he's the one that kind of held on to the Ghostbusters sort of milieu, opening his occult shop and doing the kids party thing. And like obviously
Sure.
Jason Reitman's in that scene in Ghostbusters 2 when they go to when him and Ernie Hudson play the Ghostbusters theme and all that. But he's that one character. It's like if anybody was going to literally move out into the middle of
And latch
nowhere
on to this thing.
Oklahoma
Yeah.
and sort of hunt down Gozer once and for all and commit themselves fully, it would have been Ray Stantz, and I don't think it would have been Egon. So that to me kind of felt like a bit of a falsehood already with that character, on top of the fact that I don't think any of those guys are capable of having any kind of family life, even for a split second. And it just kind of felt like that rung false as well. And I think that was another aspect of the script written by Reitman and Gil Keenan. Um, kind of, to me, felt like it was putting too much emphasis into sort of the emotion early on of a character who you like but isn't necessarily, well rounded in any way other than just kind of being like the stereotypical nerdy deadpan kind of character.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where, like, at first I was like, okay, like, I can kind of let go of some of that just because of the circumstances, but it just felt like, if you, the most believable person to do this out of those three
You're saying
guys.
if Harold Ramis was still alive and they made the same movie, uh, Ray would have been that character probably rather than
Yes.
Egon. And I get what you're saying. It didn't bother me, mostly because I think we have almost 40 years of fill in the blanks,
But
where
that's
you
the
kind
other
of.
thing, the 40 years thing, where I don't think we do have the 40 years. I think we have the two movies. And if you want to include some of the canon of the cartoon
But I don't
series,
even
you
know if
can.
number 2 is canon, really.
Well,
Like,
that's also true. And I feel like
yeah.
the 40-year gap, like, it doesn't have merit in terms of, like, if you're looking at any other blockbuster franchise that's been going on for decades, where,
Yeah.
like, there's been other sequels, there's been other installments. We've only gotten the two Ghostbusters movie, one of which is a reboot,
Yeah.
and then the other one, which is also kind of a reboot, but also a legacy sequel that connects directly back to the 1984 movie. So does it include the Scoleri brothers and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ivan and all the ooze and all that? Ivan ooze, Vigo, pardon me, Ivan ooze. That's Power Rangers. But, like, with Vigo, like, with that stuff, like, it almost feels like it just kind of stopped and started. Like, it doesn't feel
But
like
then
you
that's
you have
why
that wealth.
But I get it. But then that's why I almost forgave it because of that. Because I go, well, I don't know exactly. We kind of fill in the blanks based on some exposition we get in this movie of why Egon would be acting this way or why he did what he did, why he left his family and like left his daughter and things like that. And some of that stuff, I don't disagree with you that like it feels a little bit out of character or he couldn't do this without still being in contact with her or I also see the point of like why wouldn't they believe him if he was saying this stuff was happening or why would they be so like fuck Egon kind of thing and I'm not talking to you for 30 plus years or however long they've been estranged from the other Ghostbusters because I feel like if Egon was like yo guys remember that shit in New York like come on, I actually
Gozer's back, baby.
yeah, like I feel like they'd all believe him no matter what,
Yes.
right? Like, so I do think it is playing into what happened in real life, and they have to kind of write around that. And I think you can, unfortunately, to its detriment, you can kind of see that, and they kind of go, well, this is what happened, and this is kind of how we have to deal with that, and kind of maybe it doesn't make complete sense, but then I go back to it being sort of a kids movie and I don't mean that in a derogatory way you can listen to a review where I think the movie is ultimately as much for kids who aren't super familiar with Ghostbusters or the first movie than it is for also people who are hardcore Ghostbuster fans. And I think maybe those people will have a little bit more of a problem with it. But I also think that 40-year gap in it not being like not knowing more of the story, like that plays into the narrative of the movie, I think, of people having to learn about the Ghostbusters or these kids having to learn about them and then have to kind of take up those mantles and fight these monsters. And um, that didn't bother me that much because I could kind of buy into Egon. I like the idea of we did such a good job that there are no more ghosts. Like we
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 busted
crushed
them all.
we crushed it, we busted them all, and then that ruins your business, which was already touched on a little bit in Ghostbusters 2, right? But now that was only 5 years later. Now we have this 40-year jump where if they, got rid of all the ghosts, then they'd be like, well, our business is ruined. Now we all have to go back and do those things that we were maybe doing in Ghostbusters 2
They
or,
also do it in an
um,
episode of the real Ghostbusters, and they do a episode where they've bust all the ghosts and then become crime fighters. So
okay,
they adjust their equipment to capture criminals and mafia
sure.
types.
That's interesting. That's funny. And I like that little nugget. And then if someone was like, they all bought into Well, we did it. We succeeded, right? But Egon being the one guy who's just like, I don't know. And I mean, Egon being the probably the most scientist of them all, of the one that's trying to prove it with real science and looking into things. I sort of bought into that he'd be the one who goes a little bit, nutty with it all. But that is just kind of, I don't know. It's projecting either way, I think. Like, I feel it's like, well, this is how I think he would act, or you go, well, you either buy into what the creators and people write. And I totally get both sides of it. I just kind of it didn't bother me as much, and I kind of liked that it used it in the narrative of, Phoebe, his granddaughter, learning about, his life and what he did before, and that so much time has passed that people did kind of forget about what happened in the 80s and the Ghostbusters and things like that. And like
Which I don't mind that. I
there
like
isn't like a ton of history that they really even know other than this like one thing that they did and saved New York from. But
right, because people
yeah,
forget history in general, and
if you weren't there, especially.
yeah, and like it's one of those things where you know uh, we don't even know, we always forget about like centuries, and let alone like a couple decades, or a few decades later, like that is something that it's like, okay, I have that suspension of disbelief. But going back quickly to what you're saying about
Yeah.
sort of looking outside of the film but bringing some context of tragedy, of losing Harold Ramis,
Yeah.
and there's where the emotion kind of is derived from, and that to me has a mixed kind of blessing where like they do have the best intentions and they want to pay tribute to somebody that you know was a very underrated talent, and Harold Ramis was one of those guys that's like you know is so good in the first two movies, and it was a great director as well. I
Yeah.
mean, Groundhog Day is an amazing movie, and I think it's one of the best edited films of the 90s. Um, but you're bringing, I think, as much or maybe even more emotion to it because of Harold Ramis's passing, and not
Hmm.
because of the character Egon. But then even like learning about Bill Murray's sort of
Yeah.
feud and sort of
Falling out and
falling out
yeah.
with Harold Ramis, and then hearing Bill Murray talk about his regrets. And I think that there's more emotion there that you bring into it if you know that stuff than you do with the characters
Themselves.
themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like it works, partly because of that, but not because of the film. And then tonally, like there's just this kind of preciousness that the material kind of has, where like the first two movies were goofy and funny and irreverent, and they didn't sort of take themselves too seriously, where I feel that this is kind of precious towards every single Easter egg and every moment and every music cue that's from the original soundtrack. And it just feels like it's too much. Like the guys that made like Ivan Reitman and Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis would be laughing at this movie if it was being made in like 87 or 88 or 89. Like they'd be like, guys, like it's a Ghostbusters movie. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, but they're all involved in this. I think that's like
No, I
that.
know that, but now it's just it's so weird to me that it's
And that
like
was
the
also
guys.
like it's 40 years have passed. You can look at things and kind of have that towards this movie. And I feel like the movie, I don't know. Like I get that there is a lot in there, and some of it is a little,
I just
you
think it's
know.
too self-serious for its own good, where it's like this was supposed to be fun and charming and likable. And yeah, to your point, okay,
I think it
people
is in a
change and
different
grow,
way.
but I don't think that these characters do. Like they don't lend themselves to growth. I mean, we talked about it in the regular review as well, where like you saw growth in Daniel Craig's Bond character over 5 films in 15 years.
Yeah.
Until then, Bond always reset himself. And that was the same thing with Ghostbusters. It's the same thing with a lot of IP. Like the characters basically kind of reset themselves with every new movie. And with Ghostbusters specifically, there's not a lot to mine with other than what you're bringing from outside of that movie. So you're bringing in the relationship that Bill Murray and Harold Ramis had together. You're bringing in, the loss of Harold Ramis specifically to kind of garner that emotion. And then tonally, I think like Jason Reitman, inheriting this franchise the way that this family inherits, this farm, and the legacy of what Egon had to give, is just handled so preciously that it's like it forgets to have fun, and it's never really funny in any way whatsoever. And you could say, okay, well, like, part of it is maturing and growing up, but it still should have a sense of humor to it. It should have a sense of playfulness to it. I never once felt any of those things
Well, I
ever.
mean, I disagree with you. Where I feel like it's a different type of playfulness and a different kind of movie that I still think is funny and charming in a much different way than the original Ghostbusters
What did
was.
you
And
think was
like,
funny, though? I just want to ask.
I mean, I liked McKenna Grace and Paul Rudd, and like I bought into that. I liked the familial
But what
relationships
what what
between
but
everyone.
with the first Ghostbusters and the second Ghostbusters, there are things within those movies that people, to this day repeat and reference and things like that. Was there anything that you felt was on that level? Like, is there something that you took away? It's like, oh, you know what? People will be saying that or referencing that as a fun
But
joke.
that's not necessarily what I'm looking for either in this movie. I can like it in a different way where I can chuckle at something Paul Rudd does, or like the dad jokes and the from McKenna Grace and the relationship with the podcast, even if he is a little bit annoying. And I don't think it needed to. I'm not holding it on a pedestal or saying it needs to live up to that original movie. I think it's a much different movie. I think it is more of a, you know, adventure movie, or a kids adventure movie, than the irreverent kind of sarcastic horror comedy that the first one was. And I think because of the 40 years passing, and because of who is directing it, and because of Harold Ramis and all that stuff, that you can kind of do it that way, and it be a completely different movie but still be inspired by that first one. And that, like, it doesn't need to be laugh out loud funny or iconic. Even it can just be an enjoyable kids adventure movie. And I think, like, I didn't need it to be the original Ghostbusters. I love the original Ghostbusters, but I didn't need this to even be there. I give them both the same rating, 4 stars. I like the original Ghostbusters. I loved this movie, but I get that this isn't as iconic, and it's obviously wouldn't exist without that first movie. And even if you take all the Ghostbuster stuff away, this could still be basically the same movie, and probably be totally fine. And maybe the Ghostbuster stuff is hindering it, or maybe it's enhancing it, depending on which way you lean on it. But to me, like, I don't know, I had a smile on my face throughout the whole movie. I thought the action was enjoyable. I don't think every joke lands. I don't think none of it is any of it is maybe quotable or as iconic as that first movie, but I I think that first Ghostbusters movie was this flash in a pan, like, um not even unexpected, because obviously they were great comedic actors that you were throwing into this, even if it was earlier in their careers, or they were SNL alum, and things like that. But I don't. This movie is just a very different movie than the original Ghostbusters to me, and even though it's playing up a lot of that and building on nostalgia, um, basically what I said in the review of what I loved and why I bought into it right away is like, okay, this is the first Ghostbusters movie you loved as a kid, and kids
Yeah.
kind of basically co-opted it to being like, well, this is kind of our movie now, even though the humor, it wasn't made for kids, that first movie. I don't think at all. I think
No,
they were
no, it wasn't.
hoping, I think they were glad that kids kind of latched onto it, but it was not a kids movie. And then Ghostbusters 2, a little bit, because they realized how much kids liked it, they're like, okay, let's put in some goofier ghosts. I mean, even Slimer was always goofy, but like
I
the
mean, Vigo
Scoleri
was still
brothers
kind
and
of scary from a kid's point of view, because
yeah,
there's that one scene where Ray is developing the photos of Vigo,
yeah.
and like the face is getting more and more distorted. I remember as a kid being terrified of that.
Yeah. No, and same here. And I think that's just kind of what I liked about this is like, okay, let's put this from like kind of the Amblin style 80s, kids adventure movie, not necessarily the irreverent adult, not adult, but like more adult oriented, like cynical comedy of the first one. And I feel like it works because I guess I'm retreading some stuff I said in the review, but I guess we can go in more spoiler detail. But I think it works because of Harold Ramis's presence and how these kids are investigating what the Ghostbusters were and what's happening now and how everything comes full circle. And I think it's playing on a lot of those nostalgia legacy sequel things and just kind of owning it. And I liked it for that reason and framing it around the kids. And yeah, okay, I don't necessarily think maybe it's as iconic, and it might end up being forgettable unless it spans a new franchise from it, which it quite
Which
possibly
they
could.
want to do, obviously, with the post-credit scene
I mean, they've been trying
specifically.
forever when they announced the Ghost Core studio from Sony, right? Like creating a whole movie studio where they wanted to do, Paul Feig's Ghostbusters, but they also wanted another team and they wanted a whole universe. I don't necessarily think we even need to go there. I would almost even be fine with this just being one and done. Legacy sequel, a nice tribute to Harold Ramis. I'm in agreement with you that I don't necessarily need Ghostbusters to be a franchise. Did I enjoy this movie as, a fun, kids adventure movie? And that's why I'm a little bit more, I can forgive some of those other moments, because I do think that this movie is made for a younger audience, even if it's, I,
Yes, but it's also made for the fans of Ghostbusters, because I feel like a younger audience won't get some of the references, because again, like, I don't know if like
but I
kids,
think it's
like I'm
supposed to
talking about,
intrigue them though, to go back and see those
sure,
references.
but I feel that the references themselves are for the parents that are
Absolutely.
taking them, or the guys that are on YouTube ranting about the
Sure.
Paul Feig movie. They are meant for those people too, where it's like they can stare at the screen and point out and say under their breath while watching it, that's Zool. That's this person. That's that. And it's just like
But I think
it
it works
becomes
on both
so
level.
obnoxious though after a while, where it's like it's every 5 fucking seconds. Sorry, it gets to that point to me, because like, again, going back to the tone of it and sort of like having the 40 years, if Jason Reitman were to do a legacy sequel for any other movies that his father directed, if Jason Reitman did a legacy sequel to Kindergarten Cop in the same style, he'd be laughed out of the industry.
But I don't think
Like,
Kindergarten Cop's on the same level as Ghostbusters.
but there is an audience for like Kindergarten Cop. There's
Sure,
a
but
lot
it's
of people
not
that like,
Ghostbusters.
no, I know that, but there was a point where Schwarzenegger was like the Will Smith of that time period,
Sure.
right? And it, doesn't have the iconography, but you could still apply the same thing, where it's like, okay, we can treat this material the same way. I'm inheriting it from my father, and we can create this kind of another small town story where, Schwarzenegger's character goes undercover again, and it's this weird legacy thing. Or we could do another one with Junior, where Arnold Schwarzenegger gets pregnant, and turn that into something that's more meaningful and thoughtful. Like, you can apply that same tone to those movies, but if you were to do it with those films, it would be more ridiculous, and people would, I think,
But I
like,
agree, because it's not, again, I think
but that's
Ghostbusters is
how
on
I feel
another
with
level.
Ghostbusters. I disagree with that. I think Ghostbusters was of its time. It's still a great movie to watch, and it's still fun, but I don't think it earns that kind of tone that it's going
I
for, where
think
it's
it does, because it
self-serious.
has a fandom that's lived on for this much time with only having two movies and a cartoon. Like, I feel like people aren't dressing up like Kindergarten Cop or having outfits of like made with fucking proton packs and like shit like that. Like, there is a fandom there that has lived on, which I think this movie, being Reitman inheriting it from his dad and taking it preciously because it's his dad directing it, just like if we inherited something from our fathers. And I feel like there is something that plays into that in the Harold Ramis thing and the family dynamic in the movie, that I feel like Ghostbusters has the theme song, people dressing up as them. It's lived on much longer than those other movies have, and it's iconic. Those other movies are great movies for that time, but I think Ghostbusters is iconic on a level that you can kind of be precious about it 40 years later, especially because it was only two movies in the mid to late 80s and a cartoon that, hardcore, again, a cartoon going back to the kid angle of it, of being adopted by kids, of being a kids franchise, that you can introduce it to a new generation of kids while still giving, I get you what you're saying. It is a little obnoxious with the amount of Easter eggs, but to me, for a kids movie, they may not understand it now, but I hope it would go, wow, I really, this is for kids who probably maybe haven't even seen the first Ghostbusters movie. And then they watch this, and then their parents show them the original Ghostbusters. And then they go back and watch this again, and they see those Easter eggs because they're between the ages of 8 and 15 when you loved the Ghostbusters when you were younger, Eric. Like, I don't necessarily think this is, and I think going back into spoiler territory, the amount that the original Ghostbusters are even in this movie is it's not necessarily, yeah, the winks and nods and Easter eggs are for those original fans. But to me, this is like not necessarily for those people. It is for a new generation of kids to then go back and watch the original Ghostbusters after this movie. It's not, to me, for necessarily those people that, yes, they hope that you have a kid and you liked Ghostbusters when you were younger or as even an adult and it's your grandkid or whoever, and you're going to be the one going, oh, the books are stacked the same way as in the fucking first movie, or oh, it's that thing, or whatever. But to me, why it doesn't bother me is because it's like, okay, it can be very precious, and then it's to show these kids and go back and forth, and kids are gonna, I think, eat that shit up if they do become Ghostbusters fans. And then sure, if it's annoying to you or whoever, then that's fine. I don't necessarily think that
But do you think people are being and I'm not specifically saying you, because obviously, you appreciate the first Ghostbusters, but maybe you don't have the same
yeah.
nostalgia. But do you think that people are being less critical because of that nostalgia? Because as I mentioned, with Kindergarten Cop or Junior or any of Ivan Reitman's other movies, if it were to be treated the same way by Jason Reitman and get a legacy sequel, I think some of that reverence for Ghostbusters now, not when it was made, but over the 40 years, I think
Yeah.
that's where that is kind of coming from. But I think people would be more critical with, a serious or a more sort of somber version of Kindergarten Cop or Junior or Stripes or anything like that, where because the Ghostbusters are so iconic, people are less critical because it's like, oh, well, you know what? We might as well give them a go because every other,
Franchise is getting it.
franchise is doing this thing right now. Where, like, you know, again, Bond has done it, Rocky has done it, Star Wars has done it. Like, we're getting to that point where everybody's getting this direct
And Eric,
sequel that connects.
you're making a great point, and I agree with you. It's just like I do put Ghostbusters more in that other territory where if they were to do it with those other franchises you're talking about, I would maybe be on the other side of going, that's not worthy enough. So I think
Right.
that's where the big disconnect is here, where I'm on the side of thinking Ghostbusters, why not? If those other movies get legacy sequels where they can be very precious towards the originals and prey on nostalgia, and that's what Hollywood has been doing for, over, I mean, forever, really. I feel like Ghostbusters is in that camp, and that this succeeds in, saying we really loved the original, and having, we talked about the Jason Reitman thing of like, to me it makes sense because of what this movie is, and it is that nostalgia trip of like taking it very preciously. And why not hire the son of the guy who is he's not just, hey, we'll give it to this guy, he's never directed a movie, he's directed a bunch of solid movies, a bunch of not so solid movies, and this is an easy lob ball for him, but it could have gone. It seems like from the reaction, it is going either way. You'll either hate it or you really enjoy it. But um, I don't know. I feel like it is in that camp of the Star Wars, the Jurassic Parks, the whatever's, Halloween, the like an iconic franchise that why not revisit this world? Why not revisit these characters and treat it, because it has carried on like those movies, I think, with the theme song and the outfits and the technology and the characters. And I like, to me, those have lived for 40 years for only having two movies. It's not like, and that's impressive to me. It's like, it's not Star Wars where there's continuously been 100 million different things. And to me, that is impressive. And the way that the movie handles that, of going, yeah, it is wild that this has lived on and has a fandom 40 years later, but some people do forget about it, or it's not maybe as big as some of those other things. And that would be a reason why these kids wouldn't know about this. But let's make this for a new generation and have kids discover it just like they are in the movie. And to me, that really worked. And I do think that you can put it on a pedestal like those other movies.
But you've also been more critical of something like, say, Jurassic Park, where we've talked about
Sure.
Jurassic World and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom really preying on the nostalgia
And I liked
and the
Jurassic World the
Easter
first time,
eggs.
though. And I think that maybe to some people, to your point, are they being clouded by their love of Ghostbusters um, to kind of be more forgiving towards this movie? I don't have that love for Ghostbusters, which I keep mentioning. So, like, I think I fall outside of that, which maybe I just enjoyed it for what it is, which I think is a solid kids adventure movie with some Ghostbuster elements that I think do enhance it. But Jurassic World, I remember the first time, I do think I fall in that camp of my nostalgia clouding my actual thoughts of that movie. Like, I was such a huge fan of Jurassic Park. I was so excited for them to kind of go back and bring it back in a different light and be like, oh, they're going back to the theme park and the elements that I really love about that first movie. And then, I really enjoyed that movie the first time I saw it. And the more, I still don't hate the movie, but the more I watch it, the more I see its like glaring issues, right? Um, that being said, I'm still excited for Dominion. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think so.
Um, like I'm still very excited. Am I scared? Yes, because there has probably. I mean, I know we're kind of Lost World apologists or defenders, but both of us, I don't think it's a terrible movie. I think the San Diego stuff. It kind of goes off of a cliff and probably should have been split up there. But
Yeah, if it was
um,
made now, it would have ended
with the roar on the yeah
yeah,
yeah
and the third movie would have all
would have
been in
been
San
San
Diego.
Diego,
Yeah.
which is how they probably should have done it. Um, so that being said, there hasn't been a good Jurassic Park sequel, and they've tried over and over and over again, right? And then
Yeah.
sometimes you just go, maybe just let it die.
And that's how I feel with
And
Ghostbusters, where
yeah,
like I love the first two movies. I have nostalgia also for the cartoon series, but as a critic as well, I have to also think with my head and not just my heart. And when I'm looking at the movie that I'm watching, I'm not also defending the Paul Feig version because I don't think it's very good either. But I do think that the director's cut, the one that's available on the Blu-ray, is a more full experience. But I just look at this where it's like this stop starting kind of thing where it's like you guys are trying to resuscitate something that's not really, a long running franchise. It's not the same as a Star Wars or James Bond or even Godzilla or a number of slasher movies. Like even those films kind of have gone out of the wayside by like the end of the 80s into the early 90s. They had their run and then they kind of died out. I want to go into something that kind of bothered me in terms of an oversight, and that is with having Annie Potts's character Janine Melnitz come in and playing kind of sort of a guardian or sort of someone who kind of was the main contact of Egon. Um, which there's a couple things there that I felt like there was an oversight with her character because she mentions to Carrie Coon that Egon has basically been estranged from everybody else in his life, and yet he was still in contact with her even if it was only periodically, and she knew about his death. Obviously that's why she's coming to visit this family that's now taken over. Why wouldn't she have told Ray and Peter and Winston about him dying, even though there was a falling out? That's still something I feel that she would have told them. And
Mhm.
in the end of the movie, in the post credit scene, we see a scene that verifies the fact that she has been in contact with
But we don't know
Winston
when.
specifically.
That could have been the first time they've spoken in a long time too. At the end.
That's true, and that's another problem with this movie is the way that time is portrayed in this film is a little bit strange
And
because it feels like months have gone by, but it's
but
only
it was like
actually
last week, they say.
days. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I think where I go back is like again, I think people can have falling outs to the point where they don't speak for a very very long time, and I mean Ray Stantz says Egon Spengler can burn in hell, so that you know that like
But
it's
then as
pretty
soon as
bad.
Phoebe
Yeah,
says
says
he's dead,
yeah, he changes his
he hasn't
tone.
heard this
Yeah,
before. And
yeah.
if Janine knew that he had died
We're
before, she would have told him. She would. I'm sorry. That is something that you do. Like even if you have a falling out, if it's somebody that you knew and you had this long going relationship and it was you were connected to them, that other person that
So
also was connected would tell
again,
you.
and I'm filling in again. I think it's hard because of we talked about that long history. We don't really know exactly. They give you a little bit of exposition of these guys are mad at each other. Egon stole all the equipment. He went crazy. They hate him for it. And they haven't talked in decades, right? Like that's kind of the background we get, right? I'm probably
Yeah.
cliff noting it, but like, and we kind of have to fill in the blanks. We don't know how. Again, that burn in hell line means to me that it was pretty bad. Like they were all very angry at each other. I get what you're saying. And I think that goes back to the time thing of not necessarily exactly knowing how much time has passed and how these things played out. Because like they say it's last week because Carrie Coon mentions like, oh, my grandfather passed. It was like last week or something. Or my father passed. It was last week, and we inherited this farm. To me, it's like, was it last week of like a couple days ago? When did Annie Potts know? Like, did she have these conversations with Egon where Egon's like, when I die, don't fucking tell them shit. Like that's how mad I am at these guys. Like, like it could be in his will. It could be in anything, right? Of being like, um, we
But
don't
I
know
don't think
what
he was necessarily the one that was mad. I think it was more so the other three that
other
were
way
mad
around.
at him,
Yeah.
if anything else. And again, like, yeah, there might have been some stipulation there in terms of like,
Or maybe Ray kept ignoring Annie Potts's call. Maybe he's mad at her for being, still talking to Egon or something like that. If they've all said like, no, fuck that guy. Like we don't know. We don't know. And then that's kind of why I was mostly okay with it. It was just like, I go, well, it could just be a few days ago. And she just hasn't gotten around to knowing how to tell this to this guy who's been so mad at his former friend and maybe mad at her for, I get the implication that Annie Potts might even be Carrie Coon's mother. I don't know,
no,
but like,
I don't think that's the case
no,
because I mean, again, if we're not including the storyline of part 2
right.
where Janine has a relationship with
Yeah.
Rick Moranis's character, it like again like the distance that she mentions in that scene and having that conversation with Carrie Coon, it's very clear that they did not have a relationship outside
Right.
of the sort of, okay,
Because
she's
why would
going to be
she
the
be
guard.
estranged? There's no reason for it
Yeah.
either. Yeah. Anyways, but I get it. I think there are some leaps in logic and some leaps in character because of the circumstance of things, and they kind of have to take some liberties that don't necessarily completely work. Because even how the old Ghostbusters are utilized in the movie, like that call with Dan Aykroyd,
I think Dan Aykroyd's terrible in
he
that
is
scene
very
too.
bad. He's very bad. I will even admit that he's not good. It's just filled with exposition, and he doesn't deliver it very, very well at all. You can tell Dan Aykroyd's not really a regular working actor anymore. It's just selling his Crystal Head vodka. That's what he's up to. And then that last sequence where they show up again feels really kind of clunky
It's
and kind of
conceited.
and just shoehorned in. Like I'm almost at the point where I don't even think they needed to be in the movie. I don't.
No, I
I
agree.
don't.
And it's even more frustrating with Sigourney Weaver
Yeah.
coming back as Dana in the post-credit scene
Which he was also in the post credits of the 2016 movie.
because it just seems like that was a missed opportunity there,
Yeah.
especially because Peter Venkman and Dana are basically in a relationship at that point, and or at least it would assume because he has a wedding ring on and he's with her. Um it just seems like it would be a great kind of moment for her to be wearing the Ghostbuster outfit and taking revenge on Gozer and sort of having that moment, because it feels like in both films she was the victim of supernatural forces, both preyed upon her and her son Oscar. And then, if you had this moment where, over the years she's kind of learned the science and learned how to use the
Yeah.
proton pack,
Just in
it's
case it
also,
ever happened again. Wouldn't
it
she
would
be
have
the first one to believe
it,
Egon if he was like
exactly. And then also it would have been a great fu to all the fanboys who basically sort of brought in
yeah,
this
Lady
toxic fandom to
Ghostbusters,
the
yeah.
Lady Ghostbusters, say, well, like, Sigourney Weaver, who is one of the great actors of the 70s and 80s and basically was the head of this incredible franchise with Alien, is more than capable of, standing side by side with these other kind of schlubby guys. And it just feels like, again, like it's such a missed opportunity, and relegating her to this stupid post-credit scene that is referencing, the one clinical trial that Bill Murray has at the beginning, which is funny, but it's like unnecessary for that movie. It's just
I'm sorry
bothersome.
for the Animal Crossing music in the background. um, yeah, no, when you first said that to me, I disagreed with you because I was like, I don't think it would have made any sense for her to randomly show up, not being a part of it. But the way, after talking to you and you just explained it very eloquently, I can see that, and I think that could have been a good moment. Because personally, I understand why they're in the movie and why you need that moment. I just don't think, me personally, the way that I've talked about the movie being like, it is more about a new generation. It does prey on nostalgia. There are way too many Easter eggs. Like the most egregious one, not even an Easter egg, but a plot point of like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Men is awful. Like it's just, one, doesn't make any sense. Two, it's stupid. And like,
I didn't like
it's just,
Muncher though either.
yeah.
I
And
felt like
Muncher being
Muncher
too
is
much like
just,
Slimer, budget
yeah,
Slimer. I get that. I get it.
Budge
But
Slimer.
yeah. Um, and I just think that moment with them right at the end coming in uh doesn't even really work that well. It's obviously a cheap pop for the old fans and things like that, but
Well, especially with
um
the lines as well, like,
yeah.
Ray getting a second chance to say, yes, we are gods, and
Yeah, but
not.
even that doesn't play that well, right?
No, I mean,
Um
the one thing I did like about the casting of Gozer is that it was, Olivia Wilde
yeah,
plays the role, and
which
I think that
was
was actually
surprising
smart.
to me, yeah.
But the other thing I didn't care for, and it's not a big moment or anything, but it is just momentarily distracting. But I guess it's because of Jason Reitman always using him. Is
J.K.
J.K.
Simmons.
Simmons
Yeah.
is the
Evo
architect?
Shandor.
Yeah,
Yeah, is Evo Shandor. And then Josh Gad was Muncher. So those are your
fuck. That's probably another reason why I don't like Muncher.
and Tracy Letts in another cameo too. Bokeem Woodbine too. I mean, not more than cameos. They're just kind of in the movie, but
And it does
um
feel choppy too. Like it feels like certain scenes they probably had multiple takes that, they were kind of like, okay, does this one work better in terms of like what we're going for, or like, there's stuff in the trailer that is cut out of the film. Like there is a
yeah,
shot
I'm
of
wondering if there will be some
Tracy
sort
Letts
of,
holding a shovel that's
yeah.
in some of the trailers, and he's like going to investigate something, and it's not in the movie.
I'm wondering if we get a different cut of it again as well. But like, um, yeah, and that whole ending, I almost think it could have worked without them, but I know you have to have them in the movie. But
It should have had them sooner in the film, or
I think
be
so. Yeah,
integral in some other way, because it's like, if you're going to do Ghostbusters Generations, which I think that's probably what it should have been,
yeah.
you like, I remember Dan Aykroyd was talking about the version that he wanted to do when Harold Ramis was still alive, where it was basically they were training the next generation of Ghostbusters, that they were still active Ghostbusters, but they knew that their time, in service was coming to an end, so they were training the next generation.
Hmm.
Here, you have to deal with the fact that Harold Ramis is gone, but also you have to now deal with, the toxic fandom and entitlement that came with the 2016 movie, and that, like, okay, we're not going to do another all female version, but at the same time, we shouldn't do just an all male version, so we should have it from the point of view of kids, so we'll play it safe that way. And the movie obviously really does not care about Finn Wolfhard for the most part. He's
Yeah.
almost like Timothy Chalamet in Interstellar, where it's almost like he's a second thought. And I just felt, again, like at times, like Jason Reitman kind of felt like this was just an obligation for him to kind of make the next movie he really wanted to make, because everything that he's done up until now, the last two or three films have all been box office failures, and maybe this is the movie where it's like, I'll do this in terms of a compromise, because this will be able to get me to the
A one
next
for
film I
you, one for
want
me kind of
to.
thing with
Yeah,
Sony or something. Yeah.
I want to make
It's
another front runner, but I can't do that just based on doing the front runner, so I
and
got to
that's
do
what and
Ghostbusters.
that what intrigues me moving forward to kind of wrap this up. Like again, the whole again, and some of the more, things that I think you can get away with, again, with my lens of going, it's just for newer Ghostbuster fans or kids that aren't Ghostbuster fans yet is how
Well, it's
you
like
can
Phantom
kind of,
Menace, right?
it's the same plot again. And yeah, and I agree with you with Phantom Menace as well.
Where like Phantom Menace was a movie where, you know, when it was released, there were fans going into this thing thinking it was going to be made for them, but then
It's
George
a kids
Lucas
movie. Yeah.
brought in Jar Jar and, you know, creatures that fart and
Yeah.
so yeah, like
I don't think it's maybe as much as, because I think there's different levels of kids movie, and I think this is sort of in that vein, but maybe not as slapsticky
and Watto is
silly,
still
but
better than Muncher.
sure, yeah. And then yeah, the whole plot being the exact same plot as the first movie again. It is what it is, but I
Just
think
going from urban
I
to
like,
rural.
yeah, and I like Olivia Wilde, like you said as well.
I think that was like the smartest kind of like, it's like, okay, if you're going to have a celebrity in that role, because the original actor who played that part was just a model,
Yeah,
and they cast that model because she had an androgynous look.
yeah,
And so like, you know, if you're gonna like, Olivia Wilde has like, she looks like, I rather have someone that looks like the original actor than doing some sort of like, you know, CGI thing. And that's the other thing that I do want to mention as well. Like I'm sure they got the blessing from Harold Ramis's family to do the
sure. Yeah, we
likeness,
haven't talked about that they actually show Harold
but
Ramis
I do find that there's still this kind of gray area with that
with people
still,
who
where
have
it's a
passed
little
away, where
bit icky.
yeah, I mean, I think it's handled very well personally. Like I think that it is a nice emotional send off to both the actor and the character, deservingly or not. I just think it's handled very well in the context of the movie and what we were given, and the characters, and um I bought into it, and I thought it was a lovely tribute. But it is a tricky, I mean, we've talked about it with other things too, of using a likeness of someone who has passed, even if their family kind of gives it their blessing or says it's okay. That
Well, Rogue One
um
is a perfect example with Peter Cushing, who,
yeah.
you know, when that movie was released, had been dead for decades. And again, they got the blessing from his estate and his family,
So
but
I
it's
guess
like,
that's like, who are we to say otherwise, right? If his family's okay with it and they think it's handled, well,
but
I
there
think
is still a question of an ethical question, just in terms of like how you use it, what you're using it for, in terms of like the storytelling, and like whether or not it's manipulative. And
oh, it definitely is, but yeah.
yeah, but it's just, there's just, it's still just a weird kind of area to be in. Like
I agree. You
it's
never
just
want to
something
get
I
to the
felt
point.
uneasy with, you know, still.
I think the way where they kind of, I liked how his presence loomed over the whole movie, but the whole opening was
I
shot.
just wish you didn't see
Um,
him in the final act. That was my biggest
See,
thing,
where
where
I
it's
felt
like,
like the reveal of him at the end was handled okay, and that like it never took me out of it. It was surprising because I didn't think they would actually show him. Um, I would have almost been okay if he was just a presence. And again, much like the Ghostbusters, where I'm like, you don't need to show them. I also don't think you need to show him. And I think just the way the movie handled him as a ghost, I think was more interesting than actually having to show him at the end, like standing with them with the proton, like with the crossing streams, and hugging Carrie Coon's character and things like that. Like, I think it was handled well, but I definitely didn't need it. And I'm with you where you didn't necessarily need to show him. I feel like trust your audience to be smart enough to understand what you're obviously showing and displaying, that you don't necessarily need to see a CG Harold Ramis. But
yeah, like
um,
Bronco Henry and The Power of the Dog.
sure. And I mean, you're not wrong, actually. I know you're kind of making a joke, but like, this is obviously more because he's a ghost and making lights point onto things. But like, I think that's playful and fun, and even the spirit of that character within what he can do as a ghost. Cause I'm like, him showing up at the end, I'm like, couldn't he have just shown up like that earlier too? I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just like when you start to poke holes in everything like that, that's where the movie, again, maybe on rewatches, I'll feel that way, or maybe I'll just take it for what it is and still really enjoy it. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to seeing it again, which is always the sign to me that I really liked a movie, and excited to watch it with Nevis and see what she thinks, and not really having, again, that reverence for Ghostbusters at all. So I'm curious. And then, like, I guess to wrap things up, and kind of what we talked about of, does this need to be a franchise, which I think we both agree that it probably doesn't need to be. um, they leave it on things where, and even going back to the Jason Reitman conversation of like, and he's talked about how they have ideas for other ones. I don't necessarily see him coming back to do another one
No,
unless
he'll
like,
he'll stay on as like an executive
yeah,
producer or producer and then hand it off to somebody else. Like
yeah,
this is just a way for them to kind of kickstart a new franchise. And I remember like they were interviewing Ernie Hudson, and he was saying that like they've already kind of written at least an
treatments or
outline
whatever.
or a
Yeah.
treatment. Yeah. So and it seems like he's gonna probably be
Be
a
the,
big part of sort of being the one to kind of pass the torch
which is
to the
obviously in
next
the
generation.
post credit scenes. We've already mentioned the one, which is just Sigourney Weaver and Bill Murray reenacting the what's on the card thing from the
The
first movie.
few wavy
Um,
lines.
yeah, yeah. And then the last sequence is Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts going into the old Ghostbusters firehouse, and well, first it's in his office, I think, first, or is it
Yeah,
first
because
in
you
the,
learn that
yeah,
when I mean Ray mentions it already as well, where
Winston's like
Winston
successful and rich or whatever, right?
is
And
fucking
like,
loaded.
yeah,
He's made 7 Leviathan sequels. Yeah, which I like because like Winston was always
never
kind
got his
of
due, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So like if they are setting this up and they do continue on, I do hope that they give Ernie Hudson more to do other than that. Like I just kind of felt like Bill Murray's not going to come back. Dan Aykroyd might, because I mean he's also he wrote the first 2 movies and was a big part of it, and I think like he just maybe doesn't really have anything to do. But it would be nice to see both like Ernie Hudson and well, yeah, just more so Ernie Hudson kind of get just more work.
I just don't know where you go and why. Like, why though? Like, because
Well,
again,
you could
this is
say that
coming
like
from
ghosts are coming back. Like I mean, like they could even do a
Ghostbusters 2 over again.
yeah, they could say
Uh,
like they could tie it into some like environmental message about like
yeah,
the ozone like or something triggering Vigo's ooze. That
yeah,
should be the subtitle.
Ghostbusters,
Ghostbusters Vigo's ooze. Um, or
Secret
like
of the Ooze.
they could probably look at all of the scripts that they had for the cartoon
Over the
series and take
history, yeah.
one of them and kind of go with it.
Like,
But I
what were
think
some of the plots in the cartoon? Like, what did they
well,
cover? Like,
well,
where
they covered everything, and that's the thing. That's why I love that show so much. At least the first 5 seasons or so of it, because they were actually clever and playful with what they were doing in terms of building on the mythology, but also not sort of like trying to overly expand on the development of the characters that wasn't there.
sure,
They still treated them as basically grown up men children. Like they
yeah.
never really kind of like were able to have personal lives. They all still kind of were stilted and grew up or lived in the firehouse. But there were storylines where like one of my favorites was the one with Sam Hain, which is the spirit of Halloween, this pumpkin head creature that is brought from Ireland in this stone into New York, and emerges and basically brings all the ghosts into his possession, and basically turns Halloween into a night that'll last forever.
See, that's
Um,
kind of cool. And like, I don't know if they might do something like that, like taking off some of those plot lines from the cartoon. I just don't know if you bring any of this cast back, and like,
no, I think the only person that would come back, I think you'd only need really one of them, and the way that they've set this up would be Ernie Hudson,
yeah,
because
and
he's
maybe
the
you
guy that's kind
bring
of funding it, right?
and maybe you bring McKenna Grace back like in 2 or 3 movies or something if this kept going on,
Or
because
you just
like,
you
like
recast her in an
you're
older
right, if you
actor,
skip
right?
ahead, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, because she's only 15 right now. But because I don't think you go the kid route again. And then that's what I mean by, I'm okay with this movie, being a retread while just being feeling different because it's from a kid's lens in a different setting and things like that, and feeling like a completely different movie, even though it's the same movie than the first Ghostbusters, and feeling like more of an 80s adventure movie. And I think with movie 2, you probably get back to the spirit and the original feeling of that first Ghostbusters movie, because now that you've reintroduced it to everyone, you probably find that middle ground between a kid's property and the irreverent, cynical kind of first movie and then try to meet in the middle there of whatever this next movie is going to be. And I know, you know, they had the Paul Feig movie. I know they, you know, for a long time, Judd Apatow was always involved, and they were always going to be like, oh, it's going to be, you know, Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill as the Ghostbusters, and Paul Rudd was rumored, like the Anchorman, basically Ghostbusters team. And then,
Oh, and that's the other thing. Paul Rudd, I don't think that this movie knows what to do with
yeah,
him
I
and
agree.
how to mold him. Like, it feels like, okay, times it
I
wants him to
like him
be,
because he's Paul Rudd, but yeah.
but it wants him to be either like Peter Venkman, or at times it's also trying to make him like Lewis, like Rick Moranis'
Yeah.
character, where it's like it can't really decide what to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of feels almost like it didn't have to be Paul Rudd in the role, and I feel like Paul Rudd
Would
doesn't
you have
really
rathered him be in Halloween Kills or this?
neither. But if I had to choose, I guess this, just because, but I wish that it kind of played to his strengths more so
Yeah.
than anything else. Like, it doesn't feel like,
You almost want to see him be one of the Ghostbusters, and
yeah,
like
or just
Paul
again, like,
Rudd, not necessarily this
let
character, but
Paul Rudd bring his Paul Ruddiness to this, and put a stamp on the character the way that Bill Murray did with Peter Venkman, the way that Dan Aykroyd did with Ray Stantz, and the way that Harold Ramis
I think
did
you
with
get a
Tom
little bit of
Spangler.
that, but yeah.
I don't. I think you just get kind of like this in between science teacher kind of guy. Like, there's a couple sort of little moments.
I think
that
when the
Rudd has,
Walmart thing
but
happens and then he becomes the keymaster or whatever, like you see some of that, but then it is just a retread of what Rick Moranis was doing in the first movie.
let him
And
be Tane. Let him be Tane.
yeah. And then yeah, where the hell they go after this? Like, I guess you go back to New York because it seems like they're reopening the firehouse, right? But then
Yeah.
that doesn't interest me that much, because one reason why I really liked this movie is, again, I liked that adventure feel. I liked the small town feel. Like, that, I think, to me, was that unexpected kind of like, oh, this really works with that Ghostbusters lens. If you just go back to Ghostbusters in New York, to me, that doesn't really interest me, depending on maybe who you get in the cast. But I'm assuming you get, I don't know. I have no idea where they go and
You get
why.
comedians, right? Like, you get people that
Yeah.
are, or a little bit of both, where maybe you have somebody that has a certain amount of charisma, but also can sort of, take the comedic route. But it'd probably be like, again, like, you look at 1984, like, Bill Murray was already on SNL, but like was just kind of coming into his own. He had done Stripes. This
I think Paul
was
Rudd could be one who comes back and is in that team now to be the connective tissue from this movie. And you get him to be more Paul Ruddy, like you just said.
right,
Like,
which I just wish that they kind of used him better in this
yeah.
movie to set
Yeah.
that up, because the way that he's portrayed, it just kind of felt like they didn't know what
To
to
do
do with
with
the
him.
character specifically.
Bring back Tracy Letts. I think we'll
Let's go Bustin'.
I think we'll wrap it up there. Eric, another good conversation. Appreciate your perspective. I'm excited to see it again. I really do want to see on a second watch how I feel. And I'm looking forward to. I would like to see it in IMAX, but I think it's only playing at like Young and Dundas. 40X, it's playing. I'm curious. I haven't done a 40X in a while.
They
So,
throw marshmallows at you.
yeah. So I'd be curious to do that. I don't think Nevis has ever done a 40X movie. I'm not. Nevis, have you? Which one? You saw Solo in 40X with the moving seats and everything? Yeah, there was like water. Yeah, okay, so she has done it. I wasn't sure because damn it, I wanted you to not have that experience so I could witness that for the first time. It's a lot. Yeah, it's like a theme park ride for 2 hours, which is not necessarily it's a novelty that is almost like it in the moment. You're like, that sounds funny. Let's remember we did Triple X, Eric,
Which
and
makes sense, because it's not
yeah.
a movie that you are really paying attention to, but if it's something that you want to watch, like you did Doctor Strange and you had to leave, right?
No, I watched the whole thing, but
But you got nauseous
I
though.
did because like, and that it was in 3D as well in that movie. Like, again, I watching a movie for the first time in 40X, I do not think it's the best experience, other than if it's a movie like Triple X or something really, really dumb that you don't care about at all. I would not, even Ghostbusters for the first time, I would not necessarily say. Second time, I don't know, it could be kind of silly or fun. But anyways, guys, thank you for listening. We really, really do appreciate it. please go check out if you want another hour of, basically similar conversations we had here, but we have a review up for
Ghostbusters 1 and 2, basically.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, nice. We have reviews up for Tick Tick Boom, King Richard. We'll also have reviews up for Encanto, House of Gucci, Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City, as well as many, many more. We're seeing a ton of movies in the next couple weeks. Nightmare Alley, Don't
Red
Look
Rocket.
Up, Red Rocket. Like, we're gonna have a lot of big reviews coming up in the next couple weeks. So,
you want content? We got it.
You got it. And the place to find everything, you can find us on YouTube. Just search for Untitled Movie Podcasts, on podcast services, whatever show you would like. This show being Untitled Movie Conversations. We also have Untitled Movie Reviews and Untitled Movie Podcast. Your one-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. That's probably your easiest spot to find everything. Thank you all for listening or watching. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Martin. You can find more of my video reviews at RogersTV.com/CinemaScene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
Bustin' made me feel good as a kid, but Bustin' makes me feel sad and loathsome now.
Oh, no. Bye, everybody.